In the hush of pre-dawn, before the gulls stir and the tide sighs its way up the shore, you crouch beside a weathered chapel ruin half swallowed by sand and ivy. The stone arch above you has collapsed, yet a small wooden altar remains half buried, battered, yet stubbornly present. There, pressed into a hollow, like an offering laid centuries ago, lies a piece of driftwood. It is dark and heavy with age veins of salt curled like frost across its grain. But it's not its condition that arrests you. It's where it rests, far inland, far from any trace of ocean, as if the sea itself climbed hills and passed valleys to leave it here. You lift it carefully, and the wood is warm, almost pulsing. It smells not just of brine, but of something older tar, burnt cloves, and the faintest scent of roses. Beneath your fingers, you trace a spiral not etched by tools, but seemingly coaxed out by time and tide. And as you tilt the wood in the morning light, you think you see another spiral, and another. Like the grain has gathered stories, stored them in silence, waiting. Locals say it belonged to a Spanish ship that never returned, but some say it never truly left, that the ship was sacrificed before ever touching water, its bones scattered to sacred places to bind the sea's temper. A charm perhaps, or a plea. And yet why here? You glance around. The chapel's walls are crumbling. Moss covers old mosaics where saints once wept or perhaps watched. A faded fresco near the altar shows a vessel of flame, sails curling like petals. Were these sailors mourned or revered or feared? Your hand brushes against a notch in the stone floor, a groove where countless feet once stood, hesitated, perhaps knelt. Did they come here with reverence or fear? Was the driftwood a relic or a remnant? Some say driftwood that refuses to rot has witnessed something, that it floats not because it's hollow, but because it remembers, carries the weight of what it saw. Others believe the sea grants certain wood a soul, returning it to the land only when it's ready to speak. And if that were true, what might this one whisper? Could it be a part of a ship that never sailed but was still sent on a journey? Might it have floated across oceans not of water, but of dreams, of fears, of ancient bargains never fully understood? You tilt your head, listening for the hush between waves, the lull between wind gusts. Nothing but silence. And yet, something waits behind you. The wind rustles the trees, carrying with it a salt-kissed sigh. A gull calls out, not in hunger, but warning or greeting. The chapel grows dim as clouds pass overhead, and the wood in your hands seems to grow heavier. You wonder if you left it here again, returned it to this hollow in the stone. Would something happen? Would something arrive? Or would something wake? The scent reaches you before the memory does a curl of smoke, drifting low and slow across the page of time. You follow it now, winding through your senses, drawn back into a world where salt was sacred and fire was prophecy. The Spanish sailors of the 14th century had rituals unknown to most. In moments just before departure, not after the priest's blessing, but in their own quiet corners of the harbor, they would gather scrapings of driftwood pieces they swore had spoken in dreams or floated upstream against the current. These fragments weren't just fuel. They were vessels, memory, petition. On foggy mornings in ports like Sanlúcar and Cartagena, men crouched in alleyways or behind canvas stalls, kindling small fires in clay bowls. They waited until the flame took on a peculiar hue, a kind of blue-green flicker almost aquatic. Some claimed it only happened with driftwood taken from wreck sites. Others insisted it was the oil they used extracted from sardines fermented under the new moon. You imagine crouching beside them, your breath, shallow eyes fixed. They speak in low voices, reciting lines that do not rhyme, but flow chants passed down, not from books, but from mouths of grandfathers who never saw a safe harbor again. As the smoke curls up, each man passes his hand through it, not to bless himself, but to gather a vision. It is said that in the patterns of rising smoke, some could see their journey's fate. The sailors called it La Lengua del Mar, the sea's tongue. Some would laugh at what they saw, some would weep. One man sliced his hand open to bleed the bad luck away. No one stopped him, and no two saw the same thing. There is a story whispered in katas of a young sailor who watched the driftwood fire burn clean and silent. No flicker, no smoke, just steady, golden flame. They say he dove overboard 3 days later, miles from shore, claiming he had heard the water's answer. What did he hear? Was it a voice, a warning, or perhaps a welcome? The belief was not that the driftwood told the future. No, it was that the fire revealed what the sea already knew. And if the sea knew it, then it could not be escaped. On a worn parchment once retrieved from a rotting chest now lost again, a scribbled note reads, "Only burn wood that has returned. Never wood that was waiting." Returned from where, waiting for what? You glance again at the piece of driftwood, still etched in your memory from the chapel. You recall its warmth, the spiral grain. What color would its flame have been? Would it have danced or held still? There's a hush in your breath. Now a pause, as if expecting something else to rise. A scent, a murmur, a curl of air. The sailors believed you could carry these things with you. Light the right wood, and it would burn the memory of your home, even on distant waves. But if smoke can carry memory, where does it go? Do the winds remember? You look to the horizon, eyes tracing where sea meets sky. Somewhere out there, perhaps the smoke still drifts a message or a memory or a prayer no one understands. Could it be? The sea has been answering all along. The sun dips lower now, a slant of copper light, catching the rough ridges of another object at your feet. You kneel instinctively, brushing sand from what appears to be an old iron nail, thick, square, and blackened by time. But when you pull it free, your fingers recoil. It is wood, carved and dyed to resemble iron, with its tip deliberately dulled. A decoy, a charm, a curse. The sailors of Castile once told of the nail that should not pierce, a relic shaped as a nail never meant for construction. Instead, it was passed from hand to hand before launching a voyage, held in silence, dipped in wine, sometimes kissed. It was said to represent what must not be broken trust direction, the hull of the vessel, or perhaps the mind. You imagine a circle of men under torchlight. One holds the nail aloft while the others press their palms together in a chain. The nail is not hammered, it is honored, placed gently in a pouch of lambskin kept with dried herbs and a lock of hair. According to fragments in the Libro de Mareas Extrañas, a sailor's codex full of half-legible margins and sea-worn ink, this false nail was burned at sea only under 3 circumstances: when a mutiny was suspected, when no birds followed the ship for more than 6 days, when the navigator forgot his dreams, and when it burned, the crew would watch transfixed. The smoke was said to travel not upward, but sideways, slithering along the deck, whispering as it went. A Galician captain once refused to bring a single wooden nail on board, even the real ones. He bound his ship's planks with rope and soaked leather, claiming that the sea drinks iron but chokes on lies. They found his vessel months later intact and drifting near Madeira. No crew, no rope, no leather, only a pile of nail-shaped driftwood where the helm had been. You wonder. Now was the nail a promise not to pierce the sea, not to wound the waves, a gesture of humility. In the ancient shipyards of Valencia, Artisans refused to use any driftwood for fastenings. They believed nails carved from driftwood would anchor the spirit to the hull, and those who sailed would feel the storm in their bones. What did that mean, to feel the storm before it came? Perhaps the wood could speak through temperature, through weight, through dreams. Some driftwood nails were kept in boxes under beds beside rosaries and bones, hidden, feared, desired. In coastal folklore, a woman who kept one would never lose a husband to the sea, but might never keep him either. You examine the piece in your hand again. The weight is wrong, too light to hold anything fast. But what if it wasn't made to hold, but to release? Did sailors forge these tokens in quiet desperation, hoping the sea would take the offering instead of them? And when they tossed them overboard in the deepest part of the voyage, what did they whisper then? Could it be that some ships stayed afloat not by the strength of their wood, but by the surrender of it? You walk farther now, the terrain soft beneath your boots, the scent of salt, a faint memory behind you. Ahead lies a ridge, not stone, not soil, but wood, half buried and worn as bone. A long slat protrudes from the earth at a gentle angle, as though once part of something greater, a hull perhaps, or an altar now forgotten by all but the wind. As your fingers trail its surface, you notice something strange. The grain isn't natural. It swirls and stops, interrupted by marks, faint carvings, shallow but deliberate. Not words, not runes, something older. Spirals, zigzags, eyes, a crescent moon inside a square. Shapes that feel like a language without grammar. These carvings were once common on driftwood planks recovered by sailors from the western coast of Andalusia. The fishermen who found them never used them for firewood, never dared to saw them down. Instead, they placed them upright in the sand, facing the sea, a kind of driftwood graveyard, or perhaps a parliament of relics. And in the margins of old shipmen's diaries, often scribbled between tide charts and ration counts, are notes like carvings spoke again last night. Lines changed when I woke. The eye blinked. Were they hallucinations brought on by seasickness or longing? Or did the carvings shift like shadows under lantern light? One theory preserved in an unsigned letter from 1372 claims the carvings were not made by men at all, that they were impressions left by deep-sea creatures brushing against the wood as it drifted. Patterns of language or claim or love. Another belief held that the carvings were a form of pact. The sailor would mark the plank, leave it at sea, and if it returned, the pact was accepted. The terms were never written down. In one coastal town, the woodcarvers refused to take commissions for sea-bound vessels. Their reason: we cannot mark what may already be marked. So who made these symbols first? One plank preserved in a monastery vault bears a spiral flanked by two eyes and a row of teeth, not drawn, but pressed in as if bitten. The monks named it La Madera que Mira, the wood that watches. No one dared burn it. No one dared bury it. The question lingers like mist between your shoulders. Were these carvings warnings? Invitations? Did they protect the sailor or brand him? And why did so many of these planks recovered centuries apart from oceans miles away share the same spiral? You run your thumb along it again, feeling the dip, the curve, the unfinished turn. A spiral always promises continuation, but never tells you how far it goes. Could it be that these symbols are part of a larger sentence written across centuries, across tides, and no one has lived long enough to read it all? A hush settles as you move inland, drawn not by any trail or sound, but by something quieter, the pull of absence. Before you stands the skeletal outline of a monastery roof, long fallen doorways swallowed by ivy. The bell tower tilts its shadow frozen across the stone courtyard like a sundial that no longer keeps time. You step through an arch and feel the temperature change, not colder, just stiller. At the center lies a stone pedestal, its top smoothed by centuries of palms. On it rests a leather-bound volume swollen with humidity, edges blackened with mold. Its title is long erased, but you open it anyway. The ink is pale scratched rather than written, as if the scribe feared permanence. You read in fragments notes more than passages, like a man confessing sideways. They brought the wood again. I told them not to. It groaned when it touched the water. It has no scent unless burned. Then a symbol, a square divided in quarters, each with a dot. A sailor's star, a map. Below it a final line. It remembers its ship and mourns. You close the book slowly. This was no ordinary journal. It was a monk's record of encounters with driftwood brought to him by sailors for blessing, for burning, for burial. Yet none were ever truly rid of it. Stories whisper that this monk, unnamed in every document, had no face, not merely veiled, no features. Witnesses describe a man with smooth skin where eyes should have been a slit for a mouth that never opened. He lived, moved, and wrote, but never spoke. Some claim he was born that way, a vow taken by his mother, who had once sailed and returned alone. Others say the sea took his face when he gazed into a mirror made from driftwood offered to him by a dying sailor. The monastery's records vanish around the year 1357, as if history itself lost interest. But scattered across coastal Spain are references to El Testigo Sin Rostro, the faceless witness, credited in prayers of protection said before departure. Why would a faceless man be asked for safety? Perhaps because he saw something others were not meant to. One parchment sealed with wax but broken long ago describes a ritual in which the monk would lay the driftwood in a stone basin, circle it with sea salt and dried citrus peel, then chant without voice. The wood, they say, would darken, soften. Once it cracked in two and inside was found a strand of hair still red. Could the monk have been less a man and more a vessel, like the wood itself, carrying memories that weren't his, kept alive through silence? Or was he a warning? You glance back at the book still open where you left it. The wind turns a page. You do not touch it again, because now the question rises like mist. What did that faceless monk witness? And is it still watching through the wood? Beyond the broken cloister, the world opens into a low, grassy field, wind rippled like the surface of a shallow sea. At its edge stands a solitary tree, not native, not young. Beneath its twisted limbs, you find remnants of canvas and rope, brittle and half sunken into the earth. But it's not the remnants that draw your attention. It's the silence. Here the air feels watched, and then just visible beneath the moss, a narrow wooden slat sewn into a length of decayed sailcloth. You brush the threads back with your fingers. The wood is driftwood, you can tell by the feathered ends, the salted texture. But it's not merely attached to the sail, it's embedded like a spine. There are stories of 14th century sailors who believed their sails required more than mere fabric. They stitched relics of driftwood into the seams hidden from view close to the wind's grasp. Not decoration invocation. One belief held that sails carrying sacred wood would catch wind faster or never tear. Another, whispered more cautiously, claimed that driftwood sewn into the cloth would act as a kind of messenger, that as the wind pushed the ship forward, the relic would speak to the sea on behalf of those aboard. These rituals weren't performed in public. They were acts of night done in torchlight with wine and silence, each thread dipped in a mixture of whale oil and saffron. The wood had to be from a shipwreck, but not any wreck, one that had never been found whole. You imagine now the needle slipping through canvas, the sailor's hand, steady with devotion or desperation. each stitch perhaps a memory, a prayer, a betrayal, a promise to someone who had long since disappeared into the tide. An old Galician tale tells of a captain who returned to port with his sails intact, despite a storm that had shattered 3 other ships. When dock hands unfurled the cloth, driftwood fragments poured from the seams, dozens of them no longer sewn in, as if they had unfastened themselves. Another journal, written in the cramped scrawl of a sailor only referred to as CS, describes waking to whispers in the rigging. Not the wind, not the creak of lines, voices, names, places, regrets. He cut the sail open and found a sliver of wood inside engraved with what he swore were his mother's initials, a woman who had drowned when he was a child. How had the wood found him? And why whisper only then? Modern historians dismiss such stories, of course. They speak of salt hallucinations of mold and madness. But the relic in your hand, this worn, ribboned plank, hidden in forgotten sailcloth, smells faintly of cinnamon and coal smoke, as though it still remembers fire. You run your thumb along its edge and wonder, what if these embedded relics didn't carry the sailor's message to the sea, but the sea's message back to the sailor? Could it be that every gust was not merely wind, but reply? And if so, how many of those messages were misunderstood? The coastline pulls at you again, not in broad waves, but in the hush between footsteps. You follow a path worn by salt and thyme, leading to a bluff overlooking the Bay of Cadiz. Here the wind sharpens, tinged with something distant. Not brine, not smoke, something stranger. You scan the horizon, expecting only sea. But then, just below the cliff's edge, nestled among the rocks, lies the skeletal remains of a boat splintered hollow, its ribs turned upward, like the fingers of a reaching hand. And there's something else. The boat did not arrive recently, nor was it pulled ashore. It came on its own empty. In the annals of coastal watchtowers and monastery outposts, one story repeats itself with subtle variations. A ship returns to port without a crew. No damage, no signs of struggle. Sails furled, supplies untouched, but not a soul aboard. They called it La Vuelta Silenciosa, the silent return. The most infamous of these was the San Ubaldo, last seen departing from Valencia in 1374, with a full crew and fair weather. It vanished beyond the Balearic horizon. Weeks later, it drifted back into the bay under full sail. Locals rowed out, hailed it, boarded it. What they found was orderly. No broken glass, no blood, just the smell of cedar smoke. And in the captain's quarters on the bunk, where one might expect charts or letters, was a man-shaped figure carved from driftwood. Blackened, cracked, eyes etched in charcoal. Some claimed it had been sitting upright. The authorities removed it, locked it in a storehouse, and 3 nights later, the building burned down. No one was ever seen near it, but the figure was never found. And the strangest part, the hull bore no name. The San Ubaldo had been rechristened only weeks before her voyage, but the boat that returned bore no title. Just a single spiral painted faintly near the stern. Theories bloomed like barnacles. Mutiny, madness, a pact with coastal witches. Some said it was the sea itself, taking what was owed, then sending back what could not drown. After this event, sailors along the Iberian coast began to whisper of the third crew, an unseen set of hands that joined each voyage summoned when certain conditions aligned. The presence was neither evil nor benign. It was simply inevitable. You look now at the shattered boat before you. Nestled inside, near what might have been the helm, rests a coil of rope, and beside it, something smoother. You descend the bluff, carefully sliding between rocks until your hand finds it. Wood again. Driftwood. This time shaped like a face, not carved, not chiseled, formed by fire and water. two holes like eyes, a ridge where a nose might have been, charred around the edges, and again the spiral. Could it be that the crew did not vanish, but gave themselves up? Were they taken, or were they returned to something older than the sea itself? And the figure found on that bunk, was it left behind, or left in place? You hold the piece, gently uncertain whether to call it relic, artifact, or witness. What if the sea does not always consume, but remembers? And in remembering returns what no longer belongs anywhere else? The dunes whisper now, guiding your steps toward a quieter place, not inland, but not quite shore. A liminal space, the kind of stretch where the wind forgets which direction it came from, and the sea, though distant, seems to breathe from beneath the sand. Your feet crunch against something unfamiliar. You kneel. A glass bottle, cloudy with age, lies half submerged. You pull it loose, brushing away sediment and shell. Its shape is strange, more squared than round, and sealed with dark wax. The wax bears a crude spiral pressed by thumb. You hesitate, then, as if compelled, you open it. Inside is seawater, or what looks like seawater, but it glows, just faintly. Not with the eerie green of phosphorus, but with a golden hue like fireflies blurred by fog. The liquid pulses gently, as if alive, as if aware of being freed. There are tales rare and scattered of bottles found along the coast of northern Spain, bottles no one remembered casting into the sea, each one sealed always with wax and inside water that never smelled of salt. Some of it shimmered, some was ink black. One was found to be completely dry, yet made the finder weep. Fishermen believed these were almas de la maria, souls of the tide, bottled not by human hands, but by the sea itself. Driftwood bottles were said to be vessels of memory cast adrift, not to send a message, but to hold one. An elderly woman in Huelva once spoke of her grandfather, a sailor who found such a bottle and drank from it on a dare. For days afterward, he would not speak, only hum old lullabies no one recognized, not even him. Then, one morning, he waded into the sea clothes still on and vanished, only his boots washed ashore, and inside them pebbles arranged in the shape of an eye. Could the water carry sound? Could it absorb memory? Some scholars believe the bottles were part of a ritual that monks and mariners alike would speak confessions or desires into driftwood vessels, seal them, and offer them to the sea. Not for answer, but for silence. A final watery tomb for secrets too dangerous to bury on land. But why did some return? The bottle in your hand pulses once more, then stills. You dare not pour it out. The glow has faded, but something remains. A warmth against your palm. A sense that you are not the first to hold it, and may not be the last. Nearby, you spot 3 more half-buried, half-revealed. Each bottle a different shape, each sealed in the same way. You begin to wonder what happens if all are opened. Would they speak, or would they listen? And if you poured their contents together, what might you awaken? Evening sets in the horizon, brushed in amber and bruised plum. You wander along a quieter stretch of coast, where few footprints last long, and even the wind seems reluctant to stay. It's here, on a spit of sand, reaching out like a finger into the bay, that you find the story without seeking it. A man once saw something standing in the surf, not a ghost, not a creature across. Tall, upright, made of thick wood, bleached white and wrapped with fraying kelp. It rocked gently in the waves, never falling, never drifting, and it did not rot. Locals came to call it La Cruz de Tarifa, the Cross of Tarifa. It appeared after storms and vanished during calm. Fishermen saw it first, anchored just beyond the breakers, then later inland, stuck into the beach as if planted by unseen hands. Some knelt before it, others averted their eyes. The cross was said to hum a low, almost inaudible vibration that passed not through air, but through bone. Some said it healed, Others believed it warned, "You walk now, where it once stood the tide lapping shyly at your boots." No sign remains, save for a few disturbed stones and a faint indentation, a square cut perhaps made by tools, or waves with memory. A record in a dusty church registry tells of a procession in 1379 when monks in red robes approached the cross with candles and silence. They circled it once, no chants, no prayers, then left. The only entry from that day, "We did not dare touch it." One bishop claimed it was made of driftwood from a wrecked slaver vessel. Another said it bore the exact grain pattern of a beam stolen from a demolished chapel, a chapel that had never been built. The contradiction was never resolved. You examine sketches of the object, no carvings, no symbols save one, a tiny spiral carved where the two beams meet, always facing north, always fresh as if newly etched. What keeps wood from rotting? What keeps it standing? One traveler claimed to have watched the cross for 2 nights camped in the dunes. On the 3rd night, lightning struck it, but instead of fire, the cross disappeared. Not charred, not broken, gone. The next morning, the traveler found a small piece of wood in his boot, a sliver twisted and black. It hummed. He later swore it whispered his name. You stand now in the fading light and wonder, was the cross a marker, a relic, a boundary between what belongs on land and what cannot help but return to sea? Or was it something more ancient, a door? If so, where did it lead? And why did it only appear to those who did not seek it? The night deepens now, not suddenly, but with the slow certainty of an incoming tide. As moonlight drapes the shore in silver and silence, you find yourself drawn inland once more toward the ruins of what may have been a sailor's barracks. Just 4 stone walls remain roof-long, since gone overtaken by vines and wild fennel. But inside, carved into the walls with unsettling consistency, is a pattern repeated again and again, a single eye. Some wide and round, others narrow, almost serpent-like. One etched over a long seam in the stone, as if it were a lid that might one day open. At first you think them graffiti idle sketches, marks of boredom, but then you notice the wood. Along the base of the walls, tucked between floor stones, lie fragments of driftwood, each with the same eye burned or carved into its grain. Small, precise, and always in the center. They were placed, not dropped, hidden, or perhaps planted. In maritime records recovered from a sunken chest near Algeciras, a journal entry dated 1380 describes a curious ritual. Before each voyage, every sailor carved an eye into a small piece of wood, no bigger than a thumb. This watching wood was then placed inside their private quarters aboard the ship, usually in a corner above the hammock or behind the door. The belief that the eye would see what the sailor could not. Some claimed it protected against storms, others against betrayal. But a few whispered that the wood did more than watch it remembered. That if the sailor died at sea, the driftwood retained a trace of them, returning it quietly to shore. There are rumors of widows who found such tokens on their windowsills days before the official word of a shipwreck arrived. Some of those fragments even smelled faintly of the sea, and one disturbingly of ash. You pick one up now. The eye stares back, not fearsome, not kind, simply present. Scholars who've studied such carvings note the uniformity, almost as if each was traced from the same hand, though no two came from the same ship nor the same era. Some recovered in the 14th century. Others dated back earlier, much earlier. Could it be that the pattern didn't originate with men? One eerie hypothesis appears in a faded manuscript from the Canary Islands. It suggests the design comes from the natural whirls in certain driftwood spirals that resemble eyes when wet, often found near drowned forests submerged by rising seas long ago. In those places, it said, trees do not rot. They simply wait. Could sailors have discovered these fragments and mimicked the marks they saw, believing them protective, while not knowing their purpose? Or perhaps the eye is not a symbol of sight, but of memory. You glance around the stone walls again, the moon casting shadows through hollow windows. So many eyes watching still. What did these sailors need to see? What truths did they fear might follow them if left unseen? And when the ship creaked in the dark and the water rose, did those wooden eyes ever blink? There's a hush in your breath now, not born of fear, but of reverence. The kind one feels in places where too many feet have passed, but none recently. You follow a narrow track down to the edge of a quiet cove, its entrance marked by 2 upright stones and a row of worn footprints, bare, deeply pressed, preserved in hardened sand, as though made only moments ago. But they're ancient. No shoes, no carts, just a procession of human steps perfectly aligned, circling a central hollow and stopping abruptly before a cluster of rotted wood shaped like crude human forms. You count them, 13, each one roughly the height of a man, carved not from fresh timber, but driftwood, pale, curved by sea and storm limbs, knotted together with old kelp and rope. They stand shoulder to shoulder, heads bowed, faceless. This then was the ritual once known as La Peregrinación Silente, the silent pilgrimage. It occurred not annually, not on holy days, but whenever a certain wind blew from the southeast, carrying with it the scent of myrrh and salt. Men from nearby villages would gather at dusk, each holding a piece of driftwood wrapped in linen. No songs, no prayers, not even whispers. They would walk this path barefoot from Mountain Chapel to Sea Hollow and bury the wood effigies beneath the tide. No one spoke of what the ritual meant. Some believed it honored lost ships. Others said it banished dreams too vivid to bear. And some, usually the oldest among them, claimed it was not about mourning the dead at all, but about keeping something asleep. The wooden figures were never carved before the event. Each man brought only raw driftwood. And yet, when they arrived, the forms were already taking shape, as if the act of carrying them summoned their features or their purpose. A forgotten priest once tried to document the ritual. He followed the men in secret, sketching the figures in charcoal. The next morning, he was found at the water's edge, mouth full of sand, eyes wide open. His journal was soaked through. Only one phrase remained legible. They were not walking away from something. They were walking toward it. You step carefully now among the remnants of the effigies. Time and tide have worn them down, but one still stands taller than the rest, its face marked with a jagged spiral. No eyes, no mouth, just the spiral, burned into the chest. A shell necklace dangles from its neck, still intact. Some say those who participate in the pilgrimage sleep soundly the rest of their lives, but never dream again. Others claim they vanish from their homes years later, their shoes left behind at the foot of the bed sand, in the bed sheets, seaweed on the floor. Could this ritual be a mourning, a calling, or was it something far more ancient, a pact to deliver wooden bodies to the sea before it came looking for real ones? You look again at the sand-hardened footprints circling inward like a spiral themselves. How many returned home afterward? And more haunting still, how many truly left? The tide pulls back now, as if giving you room to witness what lies ahead. Further along the cove, nestled beneath a slope of windswept grass, you find the remnants of a low stone structure. It was no fortress, no chapel, no home. Just a foundation barely waist-high surrounding what appears to be a sunken basin, charred black, lined with salt crystals, and layered with thin, concentric rings of soot. Near it lies a small box. When you lift the lid, a dry flake of wood crumbles to dust, releasing the scent of smoke and citrus. A whisper of something warm, something old touches the edge of your mind. Here it is said, was where the songs of the black planks were last heard. The name sounds poetic, but it is literal. Certain planks recovered from wreckage and warped by long exposure to brine and sun were kept apart from ordinary timber. Sailors and monks alike claimed that when struck not hard but gently, these planks would emit tones like singing bowls, low and melodic. More hauntingly, during storms, the planks would hum without touch, especially when the winds came from the east. In 1381, a sailor from Barcelona wrote of sleeping below deck and hearing a voice soft and strange coming from beneath the boards. He traced the sound to a single blackened plank hidden beneath his bunk. He said it sang his name, and then someone else's. A name he didn't recognize. He refused to return to sea afterward. The planks were said to be made of black driftwood, not a recognized species, but wood, so aged, so saturated with sea and spirit, it could no longer burn. When tossed into fire, it hissed, but did not catch. When soaked in wine, it darkened further until it reflected no light at all. Several of these singing planks were brought to a small monastery outside Malaga. The monks preserved them in oil, placed them in a circle around the basin you now stand beside, and waited. They said the planks sang most clearly when the moon was hidden, and the wind arrived without warning. What were they singing? One interpretation recorded only once described the tones as too structured to be random. The notes formed scales. The scales formed phrases, repeating, layered. Some suggested it was a lament. Others believed it to be instruction. A few insisted it was a warning, but the monks stopped writing about it after 1392. One final entry in the ledger reads, "The planks no longer sing. The wind refuses them. Only the basin echoes. You lean down now, curious. You gently touch the scorched stone rim of the basin. It is cool. But as you lower your ear, just near enough to catch sound if it were there, you think you hear a tone so faint it might be imagined. A kind of humming like breath caught in memory. The basin doesn't speak, but it remembers. You glance at the scattered wood around the circle. One piece darker than the rest catches your eye. You lift it. It's heavier than it should be. Not damp, but dense, as though soaked in something older than water. You tap it once against your palm, a dull tone, almost like a bell but deeper. You wait, and somewhere in the air, or perhaps only in your chest, another tone answers just barely. Could it be that the planks are not merely wood, but vessels of what was lost? That they sing, not because they were carved, but because they were spoken through? And if so, what voices lie waiting in the silence? The moon rides higher now, half veiled by mist, casting the land in soft shades of silver and sorrow. You follow a narrowing path into a wind-carved hollow, where the sand gives way to stone, and the air begins to taste faintly of ash and brine. It's here, tucked between outcrops, that you find a fragment of parchment lashed to a stone with twine brittle illegible, but for one phrase: ashes and salt protection and price. Beside it, arranged with too much care to be chance, lies a small ceramic jar. It's cracked, its surface ringed in soot, and nearby a triangle of driftwood scorched black at the tip, its grain mottled with white crystals. You pick it up cautiously. It smells familiar. In forgotten shipyard logs and oral histories from the southern coasts, there is reference to an unusual recipe, one whispered more than written: driftwood ash, sea salt, olive oil, mixed to a paste, rubbed along the length of a ship's hull before its maiden voyage. Some believed it strengthened the wood. Others said it masked the scent of death, that of past voyages or of futures unwritten. A few more poetic described it as coating the ship with memory, so the sea would recognize her and let her pass unharmed. It was never applied in daylight, always under stars, sometimes by the hands of women, sometimes by those who had never sailed. And it wasn't just used on ships. In the coastal village of Rota, elderly residents still remember seeing their grandmothers mix the same paste and smear it beneath their children's beds before long journeys. One tale tells of a woman who, fearing her son would drown, coated his boots with the mixture. He survived the storm that killed his entire crew, but he never wore shoes again. You run your thumb along the charred end of the wood. The texture is strange, not flaky like ash nor coarse like salt. It's smooth, oily despite the years. A letter once found inside a sealed driftwood chest, now lost, spoke of a final rite performed by certain captains alone just before launch. They would burn a sliver of driftwood, grind the ash with salt, and anoint the rudder by hand. Some added tears, some added blood. It was never recorded what happened to those who didn't. A ship preserved in dry dock in Barcelona shows faint black smudges beneath its waterline in patterns, almost deliberate rings, and streaks like fingerprints. No one knows who left them. You kneel now beside the jar and stare at its remnants. What was this mixture meant to protect against? Rot, wreckage, regret? Or was it an offering? A bribe to the old forces that govern deep places, saying, "Here is memory shaped and burned and bled. Let us pass, let us return." But if it was truly memory that lined the hulls of ships, whose memory was it? Could it be that every voyage carried not just crew and cargo, but fragments of someone else's story, scorched into the wood, sealed into salt? And if so, when the ship sank, what dreams did the sea inherit? A breeze rises now, dry and fragrant, not of wild herbs or flowers, but of something far rarer, old flame and tallow. You follow it instinctively, as if chasing a scent from a dream you once had and never finished. It leads you to a quiet bluff overlooking the shallows where the water sits like glass, and the sky seems reluctant to leave the earth. At the edge you find a cluster of stones arranged in a crescent. Inside, a rusted lantern. No flame. Just a coil of driftwood inside the glass, twisted and blackened as if burnt, but still intact. This is where the ghost lanterns of La Linea were said to appear. Not lanterns in the usual sense. These were never lit by hand. They emerged after dusk, bobbing low over the water, silent and steady, always just far enough to be unreachable. Some glowed amber, others green. A few, very few, flickered with no color at all, just the pale shimmer of memory caught in motion. The phenomenon was first recorded in 1363 by a tax collector returning to shore, who saw 6 lights drifting across the bay, evenly spaced. He assumed smugglers until he realized they were moving against the current, and casting no reflection, they vanished when he approached. But the scent they left behind was unmistakable tallow seaweed and scorched cedar. For centuries after fishermen spoke of the lanterns, they'd appear after shipwrecks, after storms, after something had been taken. They weren't feared, but they weren't followed either. You don't chase what floats above the grave, one sailor once said. In time, pieces of driftwood were found along the lantern's usual path, all burned at one end, sealed with salt wax at the other, and tied with a thin strand of kelp. Some were carved with spirals, some were carved with names. One, now stored in a coastal museum, bears a phrase, "I am not lost, I am returning." There's a theory hushed even in academic circles that the ghost lanterns were not apparitions but vessels, that someone or something was using the driftwood to send a message. But to whom? In an abandoned lighthouse journal, a keeper named Elias wrote, "They came again last night. I saw one stop, just there over the reef. It hovered, and then sank. No splash." Later entries vanish into madness. One final scrawl remains. They're not guiding ships, they're guiding memories. You kneel beside the lantern now, its glass smeared by salt and time. Inside, the driftwood coil remains unburnt. Or perhaps it burned once, and is burning still in a way that doesn't consume. You wonder what would happen if you lit it again. Would it call something back? Would it carry a name you hadn't spoken in years? Or perhaps it would show you the place you once promised to return to and never did. Could it be that these ghost lanterns are not remnants, but invitations? And if you answered, where might they take you? The shoreline falls away behind you as you follow a trail veiled in mist, barely a path more, a suggestion marked by fragments of rope tangled in seagrass. The air thickens, hushed by fog, and just ahead, past the jagged rocks and skeletal branches of drifted debris, you see the remnants of something submerged, half hidden beneath the tide. Just where the waves withdraw in silence, rises an arch of stone, not a natural formation. Rough-hewn time worn its keystone carved with a spiral, and faint lines of script, long faded. Around its base lie offerings, small, deliberate things left by human hands. Oyster shells, coins, broken combs, loops of copper wire, slivers of driftwood tied with string. This is the sea door, so it was called in the earliest coastal records, not a doorway for people, but for tides, dreams, or spirits. No one knew who built it. No one claimed it. Yet every few decades it was found again. Offerings placed at its base were never washed away even during storms. Some returned altered. One fragment of wood left beside the arch was retrieved days later with teeth marks, human, but too wide for any known jaw. The ritual, sparse and secretive, was said to involve an exchange. You leave something that once belonged to you, and if the sea accepts it, it may return something that once belonged to someone else. But acceptance was never guaranteed. The most consistent offering was driftwood, but not any piece. It had to be twisted, darkened by fire, or time, shaped like a hand or a heart or a wound, wrapped in red string always, placed in silence, never looked at again. A parchment stored in a sealed bottle once retrieved from this very arch told of a woman who left her father's pipe carved from driftwood. He had drowned when she was a child. 3 nights later, a different pipe, heavier, unfamiliar, was found beside her bed, filled with sand. The sand was warm. A fisherman once claimed he left a splintered oar at the sea door, one that had broken during a storm that nearly took his life. A week later, he caught a fish with a piece of wood in its stomach. The same grain, same spiral, burned at one end. It is unclear whether the sea door offers peace or a reminder. You approach the arch now, the water lapping at your feet, hesitant and cold. A piece of driftwood floats nearby, small, curved, shaped like a wing. You retrieve it, feel its weight. Lighter than you expect, but warmer. You kneel and place it gently among the offerings. You do not speak, and for a moment the wind stills. The sea holds its breath, then a ripple, not a wave, not wind, a movement like something shifting beneath. Could it be that this sea door is not a boundary, but a mouth? And what then? Has it already spoken? The fog lifts slowly, as if reluctant to reveal what lies ahead. But the path calls you onward, and soon the sand grows firmer beneath your feet, packed by ancient footfalls and the hush of the receding tide. A sliver of silver cuts across your vision, not moonlight on water, but something smoother, sharper, glinting with memory, a charm hanging from the remains of a rope knotted around a driftwood post driven deep into the shore. The wood is cracked with age, but the charm is intact. A carved disc no larger than a coin, shaped from pale driftwood. On one side, the faint impression of a face, youthful perhaps, smiling. This is the tale of the captain who aged backward. They say his name was forgotten before he died, not lost, but given up. All that remains is the legend. He was a Spanish mariner born in the early 1300s who wore the same charm from his first voyage to his last. It was said to be carved from a piece of driftwood found floating upstream in a freshwater river far from the sea. The wood bore a spiral on one side and the image of a boy's face on the other, not carved but appearing naturally in the grain. Superstition most thought so, but the stories began when shipmates noticed something strange. With every voyage, the captain looked younger. His beard thinned, his eyes brightened, wrinkles smoothed joints strengthened. By the time he was in his 60s, he looked no older than 25. His crew aged. He did not. Some thought he had found a fountain. Others said he made a pact, not with the sea but with the wood, that as long as he sailed, the driftwood remembered him younger. A diary fragment, now kept in a cracked case in the Archivo General de Indias, records the testimony of a sailor who once served under him. He was kind and cruel, like the sea. When he spoke, it was always as though he had just remembered how. The charm around his neck never left him. When he slept, it glowed. When he cried, once it cracked. Eventually he vanished, not at sea, not into legend, into something stranger. His final voyage returned without him. The ship intact, the crew old, silent, gray with fear. In his cabin, the charm remained laid carefully on the bed. Beneath it, the indentation of a much smaller body. A boy's body, perhaps. One never found. What bargain had he made? Could it be that the driftwood didn't hold his memory, but someone else's? That wearing it tethered him to an earlier time, and the sea grateful paid him in years? There's an eerie possibility barely whispered in coastal folklore that time itself doesn't move in one direction at sea. That tides carry not just water, but youth and age in equal measure, and that certain relics, pieces of the drowned, or those who never learned to die, retain more than shape. They remember time differently. You look now at the charm before you still tied to the post. The spiral is faint. The face is gone. But for a moment in the shifting shadow, you could swear the wood breathes. Would you wear it? Would it remember you? Or would you forget yourself and become something the tide simply recycles? Morning never quite arrives in this part of the coastline, only a graying of the dark like parchment fading from the edges inward. You move carefully now, the air thin and brittle like breath held too long. Before you lies a flat shelf of stone rising just above the waves, and on it, arranged like pieces in a ritual left mid-prayer, sits a sea chart, not made of paper, not etched into leather, but wood. A wooden tablet smoothed and shaped by hand, possibly centuries ago. It resembles a map, coastlines, roughly drawn islands marked in symbols. But there is no compass, no cardinal points, no numbers, no dates, just etching spirals, waves, stars, and what might be eyes. This is the artifact known only as the map with no north. First discovered by a pearl diver in the early 1400s, though some say it was already old. Then the chart has appeared in various collections and rumors ever since. Always the same size, always wood, always unburnable. Its oddity isn't merely in what it omits direction scale legend, but in what it preserves. The coastlines change, slightly, subtly, as though the map updates itself not by hand, but by memory. Some scholars believe it reflects not the earth as it is, but as it was, or as it might become. But the driftwood origin matters more, for this was no ordinary timber. One coastal account from 1396 describes a sailor who claimed the map was made from the hull of a cursed ship, one that had no captain, only passengers. Those who boarded never returned, but the wood was said to weep when separated from water. Not rot, weep. A monk in Andalusia once wrote of the map appearing on his doorstep during a storm. He said it spoke, not in words, but in weight. When he lifted it, his arms went cold. He saw coastlines he didn't recognize, harbors shaped like spirals, islands without names. He hid it, then disappeared. In the margins of the same monastery's ledger, a note reads, "The map does not guide, it reminds." You run your fingers now along the grooves of the wood. One symbol repeats more than any other, the spiral cut into coves drawn into ocean swells, even nested in the heart of an island that doesn't exist on any known chart. And then there are the letters. Not Latin, not Greek. Etched along the border, drifting between symbols, sometimes forward, sometimes reversed, as though the wood was uncertain which way time moved. No one has ever translated them, but one child brought to the map during a museum's traveling exhibit pointed at a specific spiral and said quietly, "That's where my brother went." The curator later discovered the child's sibling had drowned 2 years earlier in the same region the spiral marked. Coincidence? Or memory? Is it possible this map charts not land but loss? Not places you can sail to, but places something inside you has already been. You lean closer to the wooden surface, and for a moment, it seems to pulse beneath your hand. Not warm, not cold, but alive. Could it be the map does not seek direction because it already knows where you are? And the better question perhaps is not, where does it lead, but what is it trying to bring back? The mist begins to recede now, not because the sun rises, but because something deeper, some memory embedded in the land allows it. You follow the edge of a dried tidal flat, footprints vanishing behind you as quickly as you make them. Ahead, wedged between two stones, lies something small and glinting, a strand of beads. You kneel, brushing them free. Each bead is tiny, irregular, threaded along a length of thread that crackles as you touch it. The shapes are odd, no two the same, but unmistakably crafted. The colors have faded, but the texture tells you more. They are not bone, not glass, not shell. They are wood, driftwood, more precisely, barnacle-wrapped beads, as they are known in a handful of esoteric texts, objects rarely spoken of, often forgotten and never explained. First discovered in a sealed tomb, inland hundreds of miles from any known shoreline, the beads were clutched in the hands of a figure long mummified, preserved in a posture of peace. Around the corpse's neck, the same spiral seen etched in relics from faraway coasts. The driftwood beads strangely bore barnacles still clinging to them alive when discovered, despite the absence of salt water. The question was immediate. How did they survive so far from the sea? Even stranger, each bead bore a single tiny scratch as though marked deliberately, but by what no tool could have etched something so precise in such a small space. The tomb's inscriptions were minimal, but on the inner wall, one phrase stood out, carved above the arch. Returned by tide, carried by dream. A later discovery by a coastal child gathering shells involved a similar bead one found inside a fish's belly, embedded in its scales, wrapped in strands of human hair. When the bead was placed in fresh water, it bled ink. A soft, steady leak, like it had remembered something. Historians argue whether the beads were jewelry offerings or messages sealed into wood shaped by water and left for someone or something to find. One theory posits that each bead represents a life given at sea, marked, preserved, and drawn back to land, not by coincidence, but by magnetic memory. Another theory, darker, suggests the beads were never worn in life, only after. Created as memorials not by the living, but by the sea itself. You lift the strand now gently. The thread crumbles. The beads tumble into your palm. One is shaped like a teardrop, another like a tooth. A third seems to hold an echo, a hollow inside not visible but felt. Do these pieces remember? Could they have traveled from shipwrecks across oceans, across centuries, and found their way back to the earth? Not because they were lost, but because they were sent. You recall an old sailor's tale that driftwood which floats upstream is not obeying the laws of current, but of promise. And you wonder now, did someone once promise to return? And did the sea-patient ancient, unwilling to forget, shape that vow into something you could hold in your hand? The terrain turns ragged, now shaped by salt wind and time. and your footsteps trace the outline of something half forgotten, a memory buried in ritual. You move toward a cluster of stone markers, placed in a ring, their surfaces weathered smooth by centuries of quiet waiting. At the center, hollowed into the ground, is a shallow trench carved in the shape of a mouth. This was the place of the last breath ceremony, rarely recorded, seldom explained, but remembered in the blood and bones of coastal lineages passed down not through teaching, but through feeling. The ritual was stark, simple, final. When death came slowly or suddenly, the body of a sailor was laid upon a platform of salted wood. And then, into their mouth, a small piece of driftwood was placed, not as a token, not as a charm, but as a vessel. The belief that the dying breath carried stories too large, too heavy, too soaked in salt to remain in the body. If not captured, it would dissipate, and with it, everything the sailor had seen, feared, or loved. And so, the wood was chosen carefully. A sliver from a shipwreck, a curl from a dock post struck by lightning, a fragment that had once floated free, but returned, always returned. Wood that had already traveled, so it might travel again. The driftwood under the tongue was not buried. After the ceremony, it was removed and sealed in a pouch of oilskin, then either cast back into the tide or burned in a quiet fire, the ashes saved and mixed into the paint used to mark future ships. In this way, the sailor's breath became part of the next voyage. There is one account written in tight slanted script hidden inside the spine of a captain's logbook. It tells of a young crewman who refused the right for his dying father, choosing instead to hold his hand and whisper stories of the sea. The next morning, the father's mouth was sealed shut as if fused. When pried open, a sliver of wood was found already inside, wet with salt water. The son swore it hadn't been there before. The wood bore no carving, but it hummed. One theory suggests the practice predates Christianity, an echo of Phoenician rites, or older, that it wasn't about saving memory, but containing it, that the sea once open to voices grew too full, and so the land learned to borrow them back. In Galicia, some elders keep jars of these breathwoods under their floorboards. They claim to hear the sounds of oars' laughter in storms during quiet nights. Not ghosts, just memory exhaling. You stand now above the trench, windless and alone. There is no ceremony, no watchers, but you feel the echo all the same. You reach into your pocket, though you don't remember placing it there. A sliver of driftwood, small, curved. As you bring it to your lips, you wonder, what would it remember if you let it? And if you whispered into it now a name, a sorrow, a question, would it carry that breath across time? Or would it return someday, whispering yours? The wind returns now, not loud but slow and purposeful, like breath let out after holding too long. It carries a scent that is neither sweet nor foul, just ancient. You follow it up a winding path carved into the cliffside, where the stones feel warmer than the air, as if they've kept secrets beneath their surface. At the summit, surrounded by thistles and the stubborn bloom of salt roses, lies a figure wrapped in time. She is curled beneath an overhang of driftwood and coral arms folded across her chest, her skin a dull gold under layers of salt and sand. She does not decay. She does not fade. She is the Salt Woman of Galicia. First discovered in 1432 by a shepherd chasing a lost ram, she was thought to be a statue. But when they touched her, the salt flaked away to reveal skin, not warm, not soft, but real. Around her body were objects arranged in a circle, driftwood robes sewn with whale sinew beads of glass and bone, and a piece of vellum tucked beneath her tongue, now dissolved. Tests performed centuries later showed no embalming, no preservation technique known to any age, just the sea, and salt, and something else. Some say she was a sailor's wife, drowned and returned by a grieving ocean. Others believe she was never human at all, a spirit of the sea that chose to take form when the world stopped listening. But those who tend to her a line of women from the nearby village who visit each full moon speak differently. They say she's not sleeping, nor dead. They say she's listening, because the salt around her never dries, because the wood above her shifts with the seasons, but never falls, because on storm nights she is found facing a different direction, eyes closed, arms still, but no longer folded. A document kept in the regional archive includes a transcription of an oral tale told by a mute girl who visited the salt woman alone. The girl came back with sand in her hair and a story scrawled in charcoal. She asked if I had seen the tide, remember? When questioned further, the girl pointed to the sea and drew a spiral. No one has been able to explain the source of the driftwood that surrounds her. None matches any tree or current local to Spain. Some samples have been traced to the Caribbean, others improbably to the Baltic. One piece contained a fossil, an ammonite extinct, before humans ever carved hull from timber. How did it arrive, and why here? You crouch near her now, hands resting lightly on the stone gaze falling upon her closed eyelids. No fear rises, only the strange gravity of her presence, as though something in you recognizes her, though you've never met. And then you notice at the base of her robes a symbol burned into the salt-stiffened fabric, a spiral, always the spiral. Could it be that she is not preserved, but holding something back? Not a guardian of the sea's gifts, but of its memory, stored in salt and driftwood, in breathless silence. And if she opened her eyes, would she speak, or would she simply remember you? You descend again the cliff behind you, casting a long shadow as twilight thickens once more. The path narrows, curling into a hollow where wind barely stirs and the world holds its breath. Here, in a shallow depression of sand, ringed by stones, sits a weathered statue no taller than a child, carved from driftwood, smoothed by time and tide. It is a figure of a woman, or a child, or something in between. Her arms are outstretched, her face turned upward, and from the sockets where eyes should be, faint trails of white have crusted like tears, frozen in salt. But it is not the form that stuns you. It is the story whispered about her. This is the relic that cried. There are few documented sightings, but many retellings. The figure was first noted in 1377 in the chapel records of a remote fishing village that no longer exists. The entry was simple. The lady weeps again. Salt upon the floor. We do not move her. It was said she cried only under one condition during a total lunar eclipse. Only then, under the shadowed moon, would her driftwood face begin to weep. Not sap, not water, but salt water unmistakably from the sea, clear, bitter, ancient. No one knew where the statue came from. Some believed it was carved by a grieving sailor. Others that it had washed ashore, fully formed, tangled in seaweed with barnacles along its spine. A tattered manuscript kept in a sealed case at a nearby monastery describes the night of an eclipse in 1391, when a monk, curious and skeptical, stayed beside the statue in vigil. He wrote, "At midnight, the tide went still. The air grew hot. She turned her face to the sky without moving, and she cried. 2 drops only. Each touched the earth and hissed. Where they landed, nothing ever grew again." He died 3 days later. The statue was moved twice over the centuries, both times to protect it from looters. Both times, storms destroyed the buildings that housed it. Eventually, the villagers chose to leave it in the open. A stone circle was built around her, and no one touched her again. But something curious began to happen. Children who played nearby swore they heard her speak, not in words, but in dreams. She would show them the ocean as it once was green, endless, unspoiled. Some woke up weeping. Others refused to speak of what they saw. During a recent lunar eclipse, a traveler claimed to have camped beside her. He brought sensors, cameras, salt tests. Nothing unusual was detected, but the next morning, he awoke to find his journal soaked through with brine. Not rain, not dew, salt water, and on the final page, a message scrawled in handwriting. Not his own. She remembers what we choose to forget. You kneel before the statue now, dusk wrapped around you like linen. Her hands remain open, her face serene. And yet, in the fading light, you swear her head has turned just slightly more toward the sea. Could it be that her tears are not grief, but warning? That she weeps not for what was lost, but for what is returning? And if she were to cry tonight, whose name would be carried in the salt? The light fades until only the hush of waves remains their rhythm, steady like a heartbeat just beneath the earth. You follow a gentle curve of shoreline, where sea mist hangs low like breath exhaled in sleep. And there, just beyond a cluster of leaning reeds, you see them. Footprints, bare, human, impossibly clear, pressed deep into the damp sand and forming a perfect ring, as if a group had walked in endless circle heel to toe again and again. No breaks, no drag, no signs of struggle. At the center, a cairn of driftwood stacked high, tightly wound in dried rope, with remnants of faded red cloth fluttering like petals. This is the site of the footprints in the fog, a mystery that has confounded and haunted for centuries. The first record dates to 1384, from a logbook of a coastal patrolman in Asturias who stumbled upon the prints at dawn. He counted 13 sets, all adult, none overlapping, no tracks leading in, no tracks leading away, and always a driftwood structure at the center. Some believed it was the aftermath of a forgotten rite. Others whispered of a curse that those who performed a ritual involving driftwood charms and moonlit vows were drawn into a trance, walking in silence until the tide chose who remained. One theory, found scribbled in the margins of a monk's field journal, describes an old belief that the sea sometimes calls people back, not with violence, but invitation. That walking the circle was a choice, a final act of surrender, a soft undoing. He wrote, "They do not flee, they do not speak. They carry driftwood in their arms, bound with rope soaked in brine and wine. Their steps do not falter, and when the fog lifts, they are not there." When locals discovered the prints they dared not follow, but one woman, young and defiant, traced the path at dusk with her own bare feet. She completed one full loop. On the second, she vanished into mist. Only her shawl remained draped neatly across the cairn. Her name was never recorded. Only her footprint, cast in plaster now cracked with age and stored in a museum drawer beneath a tag that simply reads, "The 14th step." Could it be that the act of walking in silence in circle is a kind of offering, that the driftwood stacked in the center is not a monument, but a witness? You stand beside the ring now, careful not to disturb the prints. The fog presses in again, soft as memory, and for a moment it seems the footprints shift, just slightly. You lean closer and realize they are warm. Could it be that they are still being made, that someone somewhere is walking the circle even now? And if you stepped into the pattern, would the sea recognize your tread? Would it wait for you? The air thickens as you move on, not with dampness, but with a sensation harder to name, like walking through a dream already half forgotten. The wind has stilled. Even the sea is quiet now, holding its breath. Then ahead, rising from a patch of windswept stone, you see it. A clock, not bronze, not iron. Wood-aged, darkened driftwood twisted into a perfect circle with smaller gears carved from the same. Its face is plain, no numbers, just notches and a spiral at the center. This is the clock that swam, The name is no metaphor. Pulled from the wreck of a 14th-century cargo ship off the coast of Galicia, the clock was discovered lodged between crates of spices and candles, perfectly preserved, still ticking, and impossibly keeping correct time. The divers thought it a trick at first, but upon surfacing, the mechanism was dry. No algae, no rust. It had not merely resisted the sea, it had traveled through it. The clock has no known origin. Its wood doesn't match any native tree. Its gears, examined by modern horologists, should not function. There are no springs, no metal, no anchor. Only interlocking rings of carved driftwood. And yet, it moves. Each time it has been disassembled, it stops. Each time it has been reassembled, no matter how imprecisely, it starts again. But stranger still are the things it measures, for it does not count hours or days. Its ticks follow something else. Some say it moves in rhythm with tides. Others claim it keeps the time of dreams, that its hands complete one revolution every time someone remembers something they never truly experienced. One sailor, who held it in his lap during a storm, described seeing images in the flicker of its face, his mother's hands, a ship he'd never sailed, a name he hadn't heard since he was a child, whispered by the clock itself. He threw it overboard. It returned 3 days later, left on the deck without a sound. A woman in Lisbon tried to donate it to a museum, but every attempt to photograph it failed. The images came back distorted, spiral-patterned blurs, as if the camera had forgotten how to see. Eventually, the clock was locked away in a lighthouse storeroom, placed in a sealed glass case with a sheet of black velvet. Yet each morning, the velvet is found shifted slightly, as if moved by a hand too light to leave prints. You approach it now. The ticking is faint but unmistakable. Not mechanical, not regular, organic, like the pulse of something sleeping or remembering. The spiral on its face shimmers faintly in the moonlight. Could it be that the clock is not counting time at all, but carrying it? That what we call minutes are simply fragments of drifted memory, drawn inward and spun into rhythm. And if that's true, whose time is it truly keeping? Yours, or something or someone that never quite left the water. The path narrows once more, winding past jagged rock and the flicker of forgotten stars. Each footfall feels softer now, as though the ground itself were loosening its grip on the weight of history. And then in the distance, a faint sound. Not the cry of gulls or the rustle of reeds. A bell, but not the kind hung in towers. No rope, no pulley, just a single driftwood beam arching between two cliffside posts, and from it, suspended by strands of dried kelp, a bell carved entirely from driftwood. This is the watcher's bell. It does not ring with the wind. It does not toll at dawn or dusk. It rings only when the sea turns black. This is what the villagers say. Those who still live near the cliffs of Cabo de Gata, and those who have moved away but feel the echoes still. The bell is said to ring only once, never twice. And when it does, something is always gone the next morning. A boat, a man, a story. It said the bell was carved from the keel of a shipwrecked vessel no one remembers building. Found adrift and brought to shore, its timbers strangely light, unsoaked by the tide. A craftsman, moved by impulse rather than design, shaped it into a bell hollow. Smooth, its interior etched with a spiral so fine it can only be seen under starlight. There are no records of who first hung the bell, only that it has never fallen, never cracked, never rotted, and it has never been taken down. During eclipses it sways, during calm seas it glows faintly, and when a storm approaches not from sky but from something deeper, the bell rings, a single note. One elder swore the sound could not be heard by the ears, only by the chest, that it rang inside the bones. Another woman claimed she heard it in a dream, just before waking to find her window open and the smell of cedar filling the room. Some researchers tried to remove the bell once. The ropes snapped as they touched them, and every photograph taken that day showed only empty sky, as though the bell refused to be recorded, as though it chose when to be witnessed. No one has successfully mapped the spiral within its core. It's said that tracing it by hand invites silence not just around, but within. One man attempted it. He didn't speak again for 7 years. When he finally did, the only word he said was, "Deeper." You now stand beneath the bell. It does not move. The air is still, but your presence seems noted. The kelp strands stir slightly. You look up. The spiral gleams faintly. Would it ring if you stayed? Would the sea respond? Or is it already listening? You wonder, is the bell a warning, a call, or perhaps a memory still echoing one final cry from a vessel the sea could not bear to forget? And if it rings tonight, what story will vanish with the tide? The bell fades behind you, its silence deeper now, as though it has swallowed something unspoken. You follow the narrow path inland, where cliffs rise like sleeping giants, and wind-worn stones line the trail like abandoned thoughts. Then rope, coarse sun-bleached, stretched taut between two ancient posts. You expect it to be tethered to something, a boat, a bell, a structure long since crumbled, but there's nothing, just the rope tied with practiced knots hanging in air. You reach out. It's real, heavy, sturdy, but when you follow it with your eyes, there's no anchor. This is the ropes tied to nothing, first described in the travel journal of a 14th century Franciscan pilgrim who wandered the Iberian coast barefoot, seeking silence. He wrote of walking through mist and finding ropes strung between poles, trees, or stones, always freshly tied, always tight, but leading into empty air. Some ended in spirals, others frayed mid-strand. They appeared in places no boat could land, no windmill could spin, no home could be built, just open space, or worse, thresholds where something should have been. And still the ropes held tension, as if tied to memory itself. Modern explorers who've tried to cut these ropes report strange phenomena. Knives dull, blades crack. One rope, when severed, bled sap. Another, when burned, shrieked like wind through a hollow hull. Local folklore insists these ropes are anchors, but not for things of weight, for promises. It's said that sailors in desperation or hope would tie these knots before leaving, not to secure a ship, but to secure a moment, a kiss, a word, a vow whispered on the wind and lost in the noise of farewell. They would tie one end here and leave the other untethered, and if they never returned, the knot remained suspended between worlds. Some believe the ropes tighten when someone remembers, that if you find one and place your hand on it, you may feel the pull of something far away. Not a person, but a feeling that never got to finish becoming. You reach out now, your fingers brushing the rough weave. It hums, not sound sensation, like being touched by someone you once knew in a dream and forgot upon waking. There are stories of wanderers who follow the ropes into fog, not to where they lead, for they lead nowhere, but because of what they pass. Through places of stillness, echoes of voices spoken long ago. One poem etched on a rusted knife found beside such a rope reads, "I tied it not to stay, but to return. If the wind forgets me, let the knot remember." You look again. The rope holds, suspended, waiting. For what? For whom? And if you followed it, not with your feet, but your thoughts, where might it pull you? Could it be that every rope is a line cast not into sea, but into time? And when the tide pulls back, what remains? The land is nearly done speaking now. The trail beneath you narrows into little more than suggestion, soft impressions, in sand echoes of motion more felt than seen. You walk, without knowing why, only that something remains just ahead. And then beneath a twisted olive tree whose roots clutch a slope of stone and sand, you find it. A crown, not gold, not iron, driftwood, formed from sea-worn branches bent into a perfect circle, interwoven with rope fibers, threads of kelp, and lengths of braided hair. The wood is darkened by age, smoothed by endless passage, and bound at 4 points with rusted pins. This is the driftwood crown. No royal legend surrounds it, no named king or known battle. And yet here, it lies reverently placed in a hollow cradled by time. The first mention of it appears in a fragmented log from 1355, written in trembling script by a monk exiled to a hermitage above the sea. He arrived barefoot, salt in his beard, silence in his throat. Upon his head, a crown not forged but grown. He called the sea his mother and the wind his witness. I gave him water. He gave me no name. Some claim the crown is far older, that it reappears once every generation, never claimed, never worn, only found. When unearthed, it is always intact. No rot, no warp. It resists fire. It floats upright. And when placed upon the head, as one mad scholar once did, it is said to hum not outwardly, but inward inside the skull, like a tide rising in the bones. One sailor who brushed against it wept for 3 days, though he could not say why. Another carved spirals into his skin until he forgot his own name. A third merely touched it and never returned to sea. Legends swirl. Some say it belonged to the drowned king, a mythical ruler who walked into the ocean with an army of ghosts and never looked back. Others believe it is not a crown at all, but a marker placed atop those the sea claims as its own, even if they never drowned. Still others whisper that it is a relic of decision, that the one who wears it is not granted power, but asked a question. One only the deep knows how to phrase. You reach toward it now, not to take it, but to feel its presence. And it is warm. Not sun warm, not blood warm. A warmth from within. Like breath, the crown pulses gently, and you hear it, not in words, not in song, but in memory. 1,000 forgotten oaths. A single name spoken in the hush between waves. A ship without sails. A journey without destination. Could it be that this crown was not meant to rule, but to remember? And if someone were to wear it, would they see not the sea, but what the sea sees? You withdraw your hand, and the wind sighs through the branches. The crown waits, as it always has. The night has deepened, folding itself gently around every relic, every whisper, every question left unanswered. The tide has returned, not as a force, but as a lull, drawing a silken sheet of foam across the sand, wrapping the land in hush. You sit now beside the driftwood crown, not to claim it, but simply to listen. And in that stillness, everything you've walked through begins to echo, not as stories, but as impressions. The spiral etched into wood, the footprints that never left, the clock that ticked where time should drown, the tears that fell not from grief, but from memory. Each fragment calls to the next, woven by tide and silence, stitched in rope and ash and salt. They do not demand belief. They ask only to be felt, as one feels the softness of mist before the storm, or the heaviness of a dream upon waking. Perhaps none of it was real, and yet your hands still carry the scent of cedar and smoke. Your feet still remember the warmth of footprints left long ago. And somewhere in the stillness between waves, a bell may yet be waiting to ring. Not for alarm, not for warning, just to be heard. Not all driftwood is lost. Some pieces find their way home, and some you sense are still traveling slow and steady across the sleeping ocean toward a shore only memory can reach. So close your eyes. Let the spiral unspool behind your lids. Let the fog return. Let the sea, old and kind and dreaming, fold you into its arms. The stories will wait. The tide will remember. and somewhere in the dark, a lantern glows just for you.